Let's get this party started. No, that's not our theme tune. This is...
Nice segue there.
Yeah, I like it. Hello and welcome to the crisis of the war.
Vietnam.
1964-68. Connor, stop eating sweets.
I'm sorry, I'm just hungry.
Between videos.
Ugh.
Right, kicking off with the Viet Cong, leadership, tactics and effectiveness. Bit of background, please.
The National Liberation Front is the sort of political part of it. Founded in 1960. They're an anti-DM and political organisation with a military branch, the Viet Cong, who they called the People's Liberation Armed Forces, PLAF. It was political and not just a military struggle, which was the key to survival to the Americans. The focus on DM's regime and particular discontent for it. They embraced all opponents of DM, from peasants to intellectuals. Additionally, not all of those in the NLF were communists. It was more a group of anti-DM and anti-Americans. However, they're still controlled and supported by the communists. However, this does lead to a class-based struggle, as the communists care most about the peasantry as they dominate the population.
Right, the failure of the US and its allies to win the hearts and minds of the people of South
Well, they did get the
Vietnam.
hearts and minds all over the countryside.
To win the peasantry over, the NLF have to exploit grievances and past conduct.
They used the Viet Minh, the liberators of the peasantry from the French.
They had also lived with the peasantry and given them land reforms.
DM had even reversed land reforms, or at least done less than previous.
Than the Viet Minh, yeah. So also the landlords, both district and locals, were not local and just loyal supporters of DM.
ARVN troops, again not locals, they're brought in from another part of Vietnam. They don't care how they treat them. Their reputation for robbing the peasantry.
Yeah, DM and its successors were only American puppets as well in the
hands up
eyes.
their arses. American hands. Okay, puppet. Hand puppet. Never
Oh,
mind.
right. I thought you. Okay. They infiltrate them. To infiltrate them, you have to intimidate the local officials and assassinate them if necessary. There is popular support for the NLF, but due to instances like this, there is also terror. Political officers are brought in to control the villages, called cadres, coming and going in the early 60s.
I must point out another little thing about the sometimes the VC were quite brutal. Is that in Hue, when in the Tet Offensive, they actually killed something like 2,000 South Vietnamese loyalists, so they would actually kill South Vietnamese loyalists if they could. Anywho,
a combination of appealing to the peasantry and coercion, or
persuasion.
Fear, is used.
The aim is to isolate peasants from the local authorities, making them apprehensive to speak up.
The government increasingly lose control, and then you turn the village into a base by political education. Through indoctrination, they only receive one view.
The communists.
Then you can recruit fighters.
Fighter! Success is substantial.
Give me some stats, Durkin.
In 1960, there are 12,000 Viet Cong fighters, and then 3 years later, in what year? 1963, there are over 30,000.
Wow, Connor.
My math skills are amazing.
It's brilliant. And by 1965, there are 150,000 Viet Cong fighters, though now they're supported by the NBA.
1964, 40 to 50% of South Vietnam is controlled by the Viet Cong.
The Mekong Delta is where the majority of the control is, and this coincides with the area where the grievances are strongest, as half the country's peasant population live there. Here you don't have to fight them, they just happily go along with it.
Lots of peasants join the Viet Cong as they see it as the way forward. America is neglecting response to this. They're allowing the Viet Cong to stay in the villages.
1964-5, the Viet Cong has as good as won the war. The ARVN was collapsing, and the Viet Cong were now organising troops into regiments and then into divisions. They're on the brink of defeating the ARVN.
Binh Gia. Oh, that sounds a bit odd. ARVN troops are defeated and the town is captured and is now controlled by the VC.
Then the Americans intervene and the communists have to step back. How to deal with the Americans? Match escalation by introducing NVA troops. Through 1964-5, they're in the north supported the Viet Cong with the NVA to keep pace.
Westmoreland believed that firepower made up for superiority in numbers.
At first that seemed to work until the La Drang Valley, where they lost 10-1.
Americans had an attrition strategy to kill until they couldn't recruit.
Communists had their own version, however, of the attritional strategy.
Control casualties, only fight on favourable terms and then pull out.
Giggity. Fight a protracted war and the Americans will die before we do.
The communists are committed to a three-phase campaign: guerrilla, large units, and then conventional warfare.
However, then come the US, who in 1965 at a beach somewhere. However,
to force them to back to one, but they will try again. They will go back largely to guerrilla warfare with small attacks. The Viet Cong initiated over 90% of firefights.
That's a good stat. I like that stat.
I like it.
The ability of the Viet Cong to take losses was because
They dictated the firefights. They decided when they began and ended.
tunnel systems. They had a very elaborate tunnel systems, and they could do whatever they wanted to do on the surface with hospitals, food depots, and ammunition stores all underground. On the surface, it would be flattened, but it's kept no matter what. Within 30 to 40 miles of Saigon, they have a constant presence, and if it gets too hot, they can go into Cambodia or Laos.
But they need help from the north, the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
Now, the importance of logistical support on the North Vietnam. Nice little connection there with the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Stats, please, Durkin.
In 1964, 12,000 troops came down the trail. 1967, 20,000 troops a month came down the trail. Every year, 200,000 North Vietnamese became eligible for military service. They can keep this going for a very long time.
In your end, though. The Tet Offensive and its impacts on Vietnam. Can we have a little bit of background on the Tet
The
Offensive?
lead up to the Tet Offensive.
1967, Johnson's locked into a struggle that is Vietnam, sending more and more men.
The military is still optimistic about ultimate success.
But Washington officials are becoming increasingly sceptical.
In November 66, McNamara is already convinced that the crossover point is impossible to attain. The Secretary of Defence thinks the war is unwinnable.
May 1967, McNamara sends a memo urging Johnson to scale back the bombing and seek the means to de-escalate, but McNamara isn't going public.
Johnson has got to focus on the positives, as the alternative is too bad to contemplate.
Public opinion is turning. In 1965, the US public is backing the war and are doing so in 1967.
However, the numbers in support gradually decline with the growing casualty numbers.
From Johnson's point of view, this is clearly worrying.
In July 1967, the polls showed
10% of the American public believed that the Americans were losing the war.
46% believed that America was in a stalemate.
34% of the American public believed that the American was winning the war.
And 10% of the Americans didn't know
They
at
were
all.
living in a little box. I'm living in a box.
As we know it, the South. In the bayou.
The doubts
bayou.
about the war were clearly growing.
This creates a need for the good news offensive, as we mentioned earlier.
No, we didn't mention earlier. We'll mention in the next one. Okay, we'll come clean. We recorded the videos in the wrong order. Okay.
Don't judge us.
Oh,
you want to come do this? It's not easy.
To sell this creates a need for the good news offensive to sell the war. November 1967, Westmoreland, at the head of MACVA, military something command
of Vietnam. There's an A in it.
Oh dear. No, command military. Oh no, we had that. Anyway,
is recalled from South Vietnam and put in front of TV/news/media centres to reassure the public that the US has the war in the bag.
In all of the years in Vietnam, he said, "I've never been more encouraged."
Maybe in the fail bag. He told the National Press Club, "The end begins now."
The Johnson administration called it the light at the end of the tunnel.
From the West Country accent. Westmoreland was not lying. He genuinely believed what he was saying, stupid fool. Since spring 1967, he believed that they were reaching the crossover point.
The communists were now taking losses they could not sustain.
He insisted that the order of battle of the Viet Cong/MVA had 224,000 as opposed to 300,000 the year before. He assumes they are shrinking because they cannot control/sustain their losses.
Assumptions are the mother of all cock-ups.
I like that.
But the CIA disputed these physics, saying Westmoreland was undercounting and more accurate figures were nearer 500,000.
That's a lot of people. Westmoreland's Chief of Intelligence, General McChristian, wow, what religion he is, believed the CIA statistics, so Westmoreland sacked him.
He was a Buddhist.
Sorry.
General Philip Davidson,
who replaced General McChristian,
agreed with Westmoreland that the CIA was wrong with their statistics and Adams' CIA figures were exaggerated, to which he replied,
"They exist when they're dead."
November 1967, Westmoreland got encouragement.
There were two battles, not none, two battles where the Viet Cong acted out of character.
The Viet Cong and the NVA launched offensive or local attacks.
South Vietnamese base at Loc Ninh driven back, losing 850 men.
Dak To attacking an American camp over 19 days with the Viet Cong losing 1,200 men.
Westmoreland describes Loc Ninh as one of the turning points of the war. He thinks that they are becoming desperados.
Washington officials, though, aren't quite so sure.
McGeorge Bundy, this guy again, starts to question the battle of attrition.
Johnson's is very reluctant to challenge Westmoreland. When Westmoreland came home in November, he wasn't asked about his strategies. By December, Johnson seemed to recognise the need to reduce US casualties and get South Vietnamese to do more.
Westmoreland is convinced the enemy is on its last legs. They're looking for a huge battle in an obscure place, Khe Sanh.
There we go. Khe Sanh, a successful distraction.
November 1967, polls completely in contrast with the July polls.
Yes, 8% of the American public now believe that the Americans are losing the war.
33% of the American public now believe the Americans are in a stalemate.
And 51% of the American public now believe that the Americans are winning the
So it's
war.
looking a bit better for the Americans.
So the polls at the end of 1967 or 8 find 60% are not happy with the way the war is being run, though.
Walt Rostow, National Security Advisor, is optimistic, saying that if things continued as they were, the war would be over by November 1968, and Hanoi would have to negotiate. Westmoreland told them that they had reached the crossover point.
Robert Comer, head of CORDS, the counter-insurgency effort, which we'll touch on a lot later, I promise you, is not a fan of Westmoreland's firepower passion. But even he, in September 1967, said that 68% of the South Vietnamese population lived under reasonably secure conditions. Only 7% were under serious Viet Cong control. However, most of these were based on Westmoreland's calculations.
Of course, some of them under casual Viet Cong control. Just, chill out, do whatever you want. Yeah. January 21st, 1968, NVA begins to attack fire bases along the border between South Vietnam and neighbours, particularly the US base at Khe Sanh, where they surround it.
Westmoreland knows it's an attempt to do another Dien Bien Phu and overran the American Marine base.
Dien Bien Phu was a French base in the 1950s, which was surrounded by the Viet Minh, or basically the Viet Cong as they were known back then, and they basically destroyed the French because they got guns in the hills. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Johnson is so alarmed that he has a replica of the model of Khe Sanh built at the White House. There will not be a repeat of what happened to the French.
Westmoreland is, however, happy as he sees it as a sign of their weakness.
He chooses to mobilise all resources available to him.
40,000 NVA troops group in the hills surrounding Khe Sanh.
Inside, there are only 6,000 US Marines, outnumbered 7-1.
Good odds. Operation Niagara, another amazing operation name.
Not Viagra.
Yeah. That was a pretty hard offensive. Is launched, which in terms of conventional bombing, an equivalent of 4 Hiroshima bombs were dropped.
Westmoreland mobilised over 500,000 troops to go, if necessary, to the rescue.
This continued from January right through to April.
The siege lifted when a relief force arrived on the 8th of April in 1968.
In the siege, the Americans lost 300 men and the Viet Cong lost 10 to 15,000.
But it became clear that the North Vietnamese attack led by Defence Minister Giap was a distraction, acting as a diversion. The Viet Cong and the NVA were launching the most ambitious operation of the war, leading to a dramatic change in strategy.
Until now, they had fought a protracted war. The aim was to survive and wear down the US with the idea that they would give in before the North Vietnamese did.
Now the stalemate had been broken. The plan was to attack every major city in South Vietnam, and showing that the US did not...
a single place was safe.
The US intelligence agencies had picked up indicators of this, both the CIA and the US military intelligence,
or lack of,
and said there might be a nationwide attack. However, Westmoreland discounted this, saying the main attack was at Khe Sanh, and he didn't believe they had enough
anything left to do anything. Usually, it is all down to interpretation of the evidence, but here Westmoreland was ignoring the indicators, so anything that didn't fit their last stand at Khe Sanh was ignored.
Yes, and thus we...
move on to...
we march, ill-foreseen...
into the Tet Offensive.
10 days after the opening of the Battle of Khe Sanh came January the 31st, 1968. Traditionally, this is a ceasefire, stop eating chocolate. Oh. This is a ceasefire, this is Tet. But this year, the West expected something, but not what happened.
Oh, God. Number 1. 19 Viet Cong entered the US Embassy, and after a 6-hour firefight, they were all killed. But still, cameras shot surprised Americans in their own embassy.
The principal airport in Saigon, Tan Son Nhut, was attacked.
The headquarters of the South Vietnamese army was also attacked.
The presidential palace was also attacked.
Everything was attacked. 84,000 NVA/Viet Cong, mainly Viet Cong, attacked 36 out of 46 provincial capitals, including the 5 largest cities in South Vietnam, with other attacks falling on other towns/villages/hamlets.
But they're coming out to fight, and so firepower will kill them.
In all instances, within days, the Viet Cong had been driven out, except in the ancient capital city of Hue, which was held for 6 weeks until March.
One US official describes Tet as the worst intelligence failure of the entire war.
Where they totally underestimated the Viet Cong's capability.
The impacts in Vietnam. The Tet Offensive was definitely a military failure for the NVA and the Viet Cong, but you should stress it was mainly the Viet Cong.
Yes. The Viet Cong had not held not one of the cities attacked for more than 6 weeks.
They suffered heavy casualties of 34,000 to 58,000.
A lot of people. 80% of the Viet Cong are annihilated, leaving the NVA increasingly obliged to conduct conventional warfare.
Communists said that they were never over-optimistic.
No, they were over-optimistic.
Oh, sure.
There was a high demoralisation in the remaining Viet Cong units. There were no national uprisings, as they predicted. However, the people were neutral to both sides. So the peasants didn't side with the NVA, they didn't side with the South Vietnamese government
Yeah,
either.
they side with whoever's winning. Much like many Manchester United football fans.
Ooh, we just lost half our audience.
The ARVN did not collapse. In fact, at Hue, they fought well. Yet still, in 1968, the ARVN suffered a record number of desertion rates.
Not for deserts, just running away.
So, that's it for the crisis of war in Vietnam. The crisis of war in the USA is our next video.
Yes, it is.
We apologise for any references to this video being the one after that because we recorded it in the wrong order.
Shh, you didn't hear anything.
Here we go. Over to the next video. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you so much to you. Thank you. Goodbye.